we're going to talk about motherhood because it's Mother's Day. We are in a series called Wholehearted, and we're talking about what it means to show up with your whole heart. And so Mother's Day couldn't fit better into that theme. And so I think today is going to be helpful, and I believe it's going to be powerful for many of us. I want you to know we recognize it's an unusual and beautiful and also a challenging day. I think for everybody in some way, Mother's Day kind of wrings your heart out in a unique way, just because of the nature of moms. And for many people, you're missing your mom today. I know that's real. Dad referenced if your mom is no longer with us, there's often an ache there. And just we talk about it and we address it. We know that that's actually a good thing, that to miss somebody because there was a close relationship, you're supposed to miss them. You're supposed to miss them. They leave a deposit, and they leave such a powerful place in your heart. And some of you are missing your mom today, and even just coming to church, I know, is a big deal. Some of you are longing to be a mom, and you're holding space in your heart for a child that you don't hold in your arms. And I know that's challenging and painful. Some of you have given birth to children that perhaps you didn't get to raise, or that aren't in your life, or there's distance because of broken relationship, perhaps, and that's challenging as well. Some of you're a mom, and maybe you're sitting beside your kid or your mom, or you're here together in church, and we would be foolish to think that just makes everything cool, right? Because there's just stuff attached to parenting and motherhood. And Dad already talked about it. The reality of mom guilt is a thing. It's real. But I think, just in general, and I know there's all kinds of different backgrounds and stories represented here, but a mom who shows up is the picture of wholehearted. It really is. A mom who does her best, does what she can with what she's been given, what she knows. A mom who shows up is a pretty beautiful picture of what it looks like to be wholehearted. Not perfect, and let's just all agree, we are not talking about perfection today, because if we are, then all of us could just go home. Only Jesus is perfect. God is the perfect parent. So we're not talking about perfection. Take that pressure off. I bet for some of you, actually, this morning was challenging. I'm just going to guess that for some of you, there was disappointment in there or unmet expectations. There's stuff that comes with relationships. That is why we're talking about it, right? Right? We're not talking about perfection, but we're talking about doing what we can with this heart that God has given us. Our key scripture for this whole series is Matthew 22, 37 to 39, which says, Jesus declared, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." We're called to, the most important commandment that we're to obey is to love God with our whole heart, our whole mind, all of us. And then we're instructed to love our neighbor, to love others as ourselves. That's a tall order for all of us. And in order to love God with all that we are, that means that it's going to affect how we think, what we say, what comes out of our mouth. It's going to affect what we do in high-stress situations. In order to love people well, first of all, we have to love ourselves, because if we're not able to love ourselves, then the way that we love others often is, it might reflect the way we love ourselves, but if we have no love for ourselves because we don't understand who we are in Christ, then what we give out to others often is pretty damaged and messy. And so in order to be wholehearted, to love God with our whole heart and love people well with our whole heart, we have to think about and address all the things. The way we run with our gifts, what God has given us, the way we choose to show up on difficult days, perhaps, like today, all of it. And the good news is that God has loved us so well. You already know this, but I'll just remind us all. God's loved us so perfectly. His love for us is just mind-blowing. He loves you, he knows you, and he loves you and I. And he chose to adopt us and make us part of his family when we had nothing to offer him, just mess. And he sees our whole heart, the parts that we present to the world and the parts that we post on Instagram and the parts that we don't want anybody to see. He sees it all, and he loves us. And he loves us wholly, and he loves us fully. And as people who are really well loved, we have such an amazing gift as we discover that, because when we know who we are, and we know whose we are, and we know what God says about us, and we know that he has good plans for us, when we know how well loved we are, then we have something to give. When we don't, and many people are clueless about what God says about them. Many people are trying to earn love. Maybe this is you or has been you, trying to earn love, trying to earn perhaps your parents' affection, maybe your mom's, maybe trying to be good enough so she would approve of you or pay attention to you or leave work to hang out with you or stop nitpicking all. I don't know, we all have stuff. But for some of us, thank you, we keep making our best effort with this mic, but for some of us, we're trying to earn it. We're trying to earn it. But I just want to let you relax today and know you actually couldn't earn the love that God has given you. You couldn't be good enough, and you couldn't do enough, and you couldn't show up well enough to earn what he's given you. He just gives it to you. It is already yours. You can rest in that. But it changes then how we love others. And we're talking about being wholehearted as it relates to Mother's Day today. And it's powerful, and it's worth talking about for this reason. Love runs in families. This is a family. Church is a family. We're called to be part of the family of God. Love runs in families. It runs in families, or it should. Sometimes it's very broken, but love runs in families that we're born into or adopted into. That's how God calls us. He says that he brings the lonely into families. God's heart for all of us is that we would be connected and part of a family. And love runs in families. And yet, families are both a source of our greatest joy in life and our greatest pain. Anybody else? Yes. Our greatest joy in life. I am not going to be emotional today. I am going to be emotional, but I'm going to do my best not to do it up here. But so I am a mom. I am a mom. And if you know me, sometimes I hold back because I don't want to be like just that mom who just can't shut up about how awesome her kids are. But you guys, my kids are like awesome. My son is turning 20 tomorrow. Yes. I don't know if he's in this room in his pink shirt, but he's up here on guitar. And he turns 20 tomorrow. And he is a man. Yesterday, Rod and Miller were measuring how tall they were for starters. So my husband, Rod, is 6'3". Miller's 6'2", but you know his whole life he's been trying to catch up to your dad. That's what you do, right? And so yesterday, Rod said, well, maybe we should get the measuring tape out. Maybe today is the day. Like, maybe he's caught up. Because it's hard to tell when they stand back to back. Usually they're wearing shoes or they both have the hair and everything going on. And so we weren't totally sure, so they got the measuring tape out, and Rod is, forgive me, Rod, slightly under 6'3", because that's what happens as you age. We lose a little height, right? I'll tell you I'm 5'11", I'm not. That's inaccurate. I'm now 5'10 and a half, because that happens. I was once 5'11". Rod's just a smidge under 6'3". Miller is 6'2". Was he a little over 6'2", Rod? Right on 6'2", okay. However, then they thought, let's measure their wingspan, because that's a whole different set of measurements. So Rod is 6'3", his wingspan is 6'3". Yes? Miller is 6'2", his wingspan is 6'6". Yeah. Which he gets that from his grandfather. Dad has the long wingspan as well. So there you go. He can beat his dad in something. However, I don't even know how I got to that. Oh, I was telling you how much I love my kids. I love them. I love them. I could talk about them all day long, and watch me, I will. I don't have the time to do it. But our greatest joy in life, 100%, comes from family, as well as our most devastating pain. And even as I think about motherhood, and I'm talking to the moms in the room, you know, there's the highlights, and we tend to talk about those, but there's also just like the silent drives to school in the morning, or church perhaps, the burnt pizzas, the many burnt pizzas in our house, the times when I thought I'd broken my children. I thought what did I do? I was trying to do my best, but there's been times when you think, oh my goodness, why didn't somebody else have this job? The times when I thought I've just messed them up. The times when I thought I was doing good, and then they let me know how I disappointed them. I'm just going to talk about all the things, because I'm going to assume you're all with me on this. And that's what family does. Family points out our weak spots like nothing else. Family also rubs off our sharp edges like nothing else. It's a joy, and it is challenging. And so when it comes to being a mom who shows up, that takes guts, and it takes work, and it is a picture of being wholehearted. And I want to make this note that biology makes you a mom. Ann Voskamp also says bonding makes you a mom. That for many of us, and this would be me as well, I had the most amazing mom. She had me when she was 19. She was a baby. But she's amazing in all the ways. But I have other moms as well. It doesn't just take a village, it takes an army to raise a child in the way that they should go. It takes all of us. I'm so grateful for the other moms in this house and beyond, in my family, who have spoken into my kids' lives and who have challenged them and encouraged them and called them out and saw things I couldn't see. There are many. In my own life, there are many of you in this room, many who have, in many ways, carried me. I am the person that I am today because of the army of women that God called. And so while we've become a mom, perhaps because of biology, perhaps because of the gift of adoption or fostering, there are also many of you in this room who perhaps haven't birthed or raised a child, but you have absolutely been part of raising a child or a person. We need those who mentor others, and that would be many of you. And that's what I want to talk about today, using a story from the Old Testament, Exodus 2, a story of a man his name was Moses. I'm sure you have heard of him. A guy who, he was a complicated man. He had insecurities like we all do. We know that the call of God was on Moses' life. And yet when God showed up in a burning bush and spoke to this guy and told him what he was called to do, Moses had all kinds of questions. He asked, who am I? Could you send somebody else? And yet we watch the life of Moses and we see how he chose to wholeheartedly show up, rise up, do really challenging things. And he was a history maker. He was a great change maker. He altered the course of history. He changed our history. And we look at him as a man of great faith. Well, Moses, if you look at somebody and you wonder, where did that come from? There are many women in Moses' story who mothered him. There was an army of women who chose to do what God was asking them to do, and because they stepped up and they stood in their place, and many of them have seemingly small roles, and yet we see how when God calls somebody, he actually calls many. That when each one of us choose to step into our place and listen to the call of God and rise, that together lives are impacted for eternity, which I think is just the most incredible thing. So Moses' story is a story of a child who was mothered by many, and as we look at these women, we'll see that they're not perfect. Praise Jesus, they're not perfect. But they did what they could, and it changed history. So if you go to Exodus, and we'll be in Exodus 2 for a bit here. Exodus is a story of divine rescue. It's a story of God leading his people out of oppression. They've come through, they've had a big story already at this point, and God sees them. And Exodus is how he leads them out. He draws them away from slavery and oppression. He leads his people who are looking for a new home to a new place. And I think that this describes all of us, that each one of us has a longing on the inside of us for home. We have a longing to be in the place where God wants us to be. And this book tells the plight of the people of Israel under the dictatorship of Pharaoh. What they were dealing with was heavy and intense, and they were oppressed. And if you were to just look at their situation, it would seem impossible. And yet God had a plan. And as they were in Egypt, and as they were under Pharaoh, they kept multiplying. They were slaves, but they just kept multiplying, having babies. And so Pharaoh was threatened by the children of God. He was threatened by the fact that they just kept multiplying, and he wasn't sure what to do with them. And so he had made a decree that all the midwives kill the baby boys. He figured if he could get rid of the baby boys, that no leader was going to come and take over. And so in Exodus 2, starting in verse 1, here we see a story of a few women who came together in the life of Moses, in the very early life of Moses. Exodus 2, verse 1 says, "About this time, a man and woman from the tribe of Levi got married. The woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She saw that he was a special baby," which every mother sees that they're a special baby. She was right. He was a special baby. And she kept him hidden for 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she got a basket made of papyrus reeds and waterproofed it with tar and pitch. She put the baby in the basket and laid it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile River. The baby's sister then stood at a distance, watching to see what would happen to him. Soon Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the river, and her attendants walked along the riverbank. When the princess saw the basket among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it for her. When the princess opened it, she saw the baby. The little boy was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This must be one of the Hebrew children," she said. Then the baby's sister approached the princess. "Should I go and find one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" she asked. "Yes, do," the princess replied. So the girl went and called the baby's mother. "Take this baby and nurse him for me," the princess told the baby's mother. "I will pay you for your help." So the woman took her baby home and nursed him. Later, when the boy was older, his mother brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her own son. The princess named him Moses, for she explained, "I lifted him out of the water." So here we see this child who is obviously destined for greatness. We know this. Pharaoh wants him dead, but God has another plan for this little Hebrew baby. And so God's plan of providence intervenes along with the help of 5 significant women in this story. And as we look at them, we see that they did not do the politically correct thing. They didn't do what was expected of them. They didn't do what was safe. Each one of them stepped out of a comfortable place in order to listen to God and to protect the life of this child. And we see how they came together in solidarity to help raise this kid. So the first one, the first 2 women to take note of are Hebrew midwives. Their names were Shiphrah and Puah. And yes, I can't say that without suggesting you might want to add that to your baby name list. Shiphrah, Puah, there you go. And they're referenced in the first chapter of Exodus where it says, the midwives respected God more than they feared Pharaoh. The midwives respected God more than they feared Pharaoh, so they did not carry out the Egyptian king's command. Instead, they let all the boys live. Can you imagine? Pharaoh gives a direct order telling the midwives that they're to kill all the Hebrew baby boys. However, these two women, Shiphrah and Puah, they are more concerned with what God has asked them to do than what Pharaoh has asked them to do. And so they choose not to kill those baby boys. They let them live. And we see in Scripture, if you go back to Exodus 1, that because of what they had done, that God actually blesses these women. There's a blessing on their lives. It says in Exodus 1:20, God was good to the midwives, and under their care, the Israelite women had many more children. Yes, they did. And despite Pharaoh's orders, the people of Israel became stronger and more powerful. Because the midwives respected God, he blessed them with families of their own. So it starts with the midwives, and then we see Moses' mother. And my heart for Moses' mother, my heart breaks for her. Amazing woman, Jochebed. She represented a mom who would do anything for her child. We see in Scripture that this baby boy is born, and she knows he's special. She looks at him, and she knows that God's call is on him. And when she could no longer hide him at home, she takes him and she creates a basket for him and sets him out in the water, in the river, in the Nile. Can you imagine? In order for her to do that, she had to be working on God's instruction to her. She had to have the wisdom of God. And she obeyed what God was asking her to do. And this mom, because of her brave actions, because she lets go of her baby, I feel like I'd be so tempted to find another way to keep my child safe. Wouldn't you want to just run off with him? I don't know, hide him in a closet? I'm sure she was tempted. And yet she bravely chooses to release and put him out there because she knows it is what is best for her child. If that doesn't describe a wholehearted mother, I don't know what does. Hebrews 11:23 tells us that it was by faith that Moses' parents hid him for 3 months when he was born. It was a faith move. It was a faith move. And faith isn't just believing that God has a plan for you or for your kid. It's acting. Faith without works is dead. They had such trust in God that they put him out there. They knew that, again, Hebrews 11:23, they saw that God had given them an unusual child, and they were not afraid to disobey the king's command. When our respect and our honor for God and what he's called us to, when our respect and reverence for God's plan for our family is greater than the voices that we hear around us, is stronger than perhaps the fear that's attached to parenting or raising or releasing a child in this world, it indicates faith, and God is moved by faith. God responds to faith, and we see that in the life of Moses. The next woman that was involved in Moses' life is Pharaoh's daughter. Not only Hebrew women, God uses the princess as part of his plan. The Bible tells us that she knew even before she heard his cry that he was a Hebrew boy who had been given a death sentence by her father. She knew what was expected, that this baby, this child, shouldn't live. She knew. And she was a royal daughter who was willing to step into that gap, who was willing to respond to the cry of this child rather than the tyranny, the oppression of the kingdom that she was part of. Her heart, we see how it reached beyond what would have been comfortable to take that child in. You know, she could have just as easily ignored the cry. She could have found somebody else to deal with it. She chooses to take this child in, and she names him, and she adopts him, and makes him her own.
Acts 7:21 tells us, when they had to abandon him, Pharaoh's daughter adopted him and raised him as her own son. Moses was taught all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was powerful in both speech and action. Because she took Moses into her home, he wasn't a normal kid. He was a kid who was both Hebrew, raised in the palace, who knew all the things that he was going to need to live out the life that he was called to. Next is Miriam, Moses' sister, who was only a child at the time. And we can't just think that the only women who are influential in a story are those who have lots of experience. Those are important, absolutely, but Miriam is a child, and she bravely steps into this story. When she saw that he was being rescued, she approaches Pharaoh's daughter. She has a solution. She's part of the plan, and God uses her. So when we look at all these different women, there's indicators in all of their lives that show us what it looks like to be wholehearted. For the midwives, it was conviction. For us, we need to be challenged by that it was conviction that caused them to do what they knew was right, even though they knew there would very likely be consequences attached for them and for the people. A whole heart does the right thing, not the easy thing. It is built upon character and principle, and that begins with knowing who you are and knowing who God is, so that you can stand up in strength in difficult situations. The midwives show us what conviction looks like. And I hope that's how we choose to show up, with a conviction, knowing who we are because of God. Moses' mom, Jochebed, she shows us what confidence looks like. She put her confidence in God. That is the faith that she stood on and acted by. She had an unshakable trust in God's plan. Trust is knowing what your heart longs for, but leaving the results and the outcomes up to God. That's who she was and what she portrays for us. Pharaoh's daughter shows us that a whole heart is compassionate, that her heart responded, and so she did. That when she was moved by compassion, that she acted and she stepped into the gap and she took that child in. Miriam shows us that a whole heart is caring and protective. That big sister protection kicks in. And what's really beautiful is that in this story, we see such a picture of partnership, that all of these women came together, not knowing that they were all part of the story in their unique way, but God knew, and God was knitting something together. And we see that there's power in unity, and they were all moved by the life of this small child. We see Hebrew and Egyptian come together. We see the slave come together with the most privileged. We see the young and the old come together. And together they did this in strength. And that is what legacy looks like. That's what legacy looks like. Each one of us brings our part to the story. Not the whole story, not the whole polished thing. But when we trust God, and we trust that He knows the end from the beginning, we trust that our part is an important part of what He's doing. At the beginning, as Isa was up here, she read a piece by Anne Voskamp that was powerful. We all want to know that our life makes a difference, that it's part of what God is doing. And when we show up, it absolutely is. We don't know often the weight that it carries, but that's what legacy looks like when we come together with our own little piece. I think of my story. I know that I'm blessed in such a unique way that we have the generations here. But you know, when my Oma was young and raising my mom, how old were you, Oma, when Mom was born? 20, second baby, so you know. She didn't know what was on the other side of her deciding to raise that child the best way she knew how. She didn't know. You didn't know, but look at how the generations play out and what legacy there is there. We don't know today what the future holds or what God has. Maybe today for you things look broken and it looks impossible. Maybe it looks like, maybe you're starting something new in your family. You come from a family perhaps that doesn't know God or doesn't have a legacy of faith, and you're the first. Perhaps you come from a long legacy of God doing amazing things, and it feels like it's kind of broken apart in your generation. Can I just encourage you today? You do not know. You don't know. I don't know. We don't know what God has planned, but we know he has good plan for those who know him, those who love him. We know that when we bring what we can, when we submit it to him, that God is able to do more than we could ever ask or think. We put our faith in him, and we don't just say our faith is in him, but our faith is backed up by action. We submit our lives to him, and we give our family to him, or whatever is part of our world, whatever we have to give. And we do not know. We don't know. But the beautiful thing that we see here in this story is that as they came together with their peace, what they were able to do, Miriam, the little Hebrew girl who was a child, couldn't do what the princess could do. She wasn't capable of it, but we needed both of them coming together. When we come together as partners, as in unity, as churches together, as family together, not as rivals, but in partnership, as gods, as rescuers together. God's dream is to rescue this world that we're part of. He uses people. He works through us as we come together, not comparing or competing, but choosing to do what we can in a wholehearted way. Then his rescue plan has some legs. He can do what only God can do through us. We're not tearing one another down, but we're championing one another. We're not threatened by each other, but we're looking for and celebrating the good in one another. When we choose to show up like that, and that is the church that I see. When that's who we are and that's what we do, God can do anything. Amen.